This is Artful Discourse, your weekly escape into the vibrant world of creativity, culture, and intellectual exploration. I'm your host, Benjamin Kirk, and I invite you to join me on a journey through the rich tapestry of human thought and the beating heart of artistic expression at Fresno State's College of Arts and Humanities. Good morning and welcome. Today our guest is Denise Borges, Portuguese language lecturer and director of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, or PBBI, at Fresno State. We'll talk about PBBI's new documentary produced with the help of Fresno State's Media Communication and Journalism Department faculty and students, and Bruma, the publishing arm of PBBI, and what's coming up this academic year. Denise Borges, welcome.
Thank you.
Oh,
Here.
all right. Now, you were born in the Azores and immigrated to the United States as a young child. How would you describe your connection with the Azores on a personal and an emotional level?
It's a very good question. Indeed, I was 10 years old when we came to the United States, to Tulare County, where between Tulare and Kings County, I've lived all of my life, and it's been a long time. And so we immigrated in 1968. And the Azores have always been part of who I am. Although when I was in high school, actually, and even elementary school, I think the last thing I wanted to be was Portuguese. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be an American. I didn't want it to be. I didn't want to be somebody else. And so that's a kind of a normality at that age, especially. But then when I was 17 years old, a friend of mine invited me to do something that I thought I would never do, which would be to fill in for a radio program that he did in Portuguese in a radio station in Lemoore. So I began my journey back to the Azores at that age, and it's been part of my life.
All right. Now, let's back up for just a minute because many of our audience members may not be familiar with the Azores. Now, the Azores are a chain of islands in the mid-Atlantic Ocean, about 870 miles off the coast of Portugal.
Indeed. So they are 2-hour flight from Lisbon or any part of the continental Portugal, and about a 4-hour flight from the United States. So they're in the Atlantic North. They're closer to Europe than they are to America. I keep on saying that geographically they are, but emotionally they're very close to America because we've had immigration from the Azores to the United States since basically the 1700s and late 1700s, and of course to the valley here since the mid 1800s.
Yeah. Now, the Azores is described as an autonomous region of Portugal. What does that mean exactly? How do you describe the relationship between Portugal and the Azores?
And that's a new concept, Ben. It was just a part of the centralized. Portugal has a very centralized kind of government, and it was just part of the centralized government, as it was used to be called insular Portugal, as from island that belonged to Portugal. And then in 1976, it became autonomous, which is kind of like statehood in the Union.
Mm-hmm.
So, although Portugal is still a very central type of government, there's not as many states' rights as we have in the United States. But the Azorians do have their own government. They do have their own assembly, so parliament elected by the people. And so it functions kind of similar to a state within the United States of America.
Okay. I was thinking that maybe it was similar to Puerto Rico's relationship, or do you think it's more like a state?
It is a bit more. That's a good point. But I would say it's probably more like a state in the aspect that it is considered an integral part of Portugal. So it is not a territory that has some kind of a connection to the country.
Right.
It is part of the Portuguese nation, and the people have is a Portuguese nationality. So it's not an Azorian nationality; it's a Portuguese nationality, and it has a little bit more. I would say it's probably a conjunction of those two, but closer to a state.
And they actually have their own president, though. Is that
The
kind of like
president
a governor?
president of the government, so it's a governor, correct.
Okay, yeah.
So the reason they didn't have a governor is because Portugal was a dictatorship for 50 years, and the Azores were divided into 3 districts, and each district had a governor. So they wanted to get away from that
Yeah.
dictatorial terminology. Yeah.
Okay. Now, there were a couple waves of Azorean immigrants that came to the United States. Can you talk about a little about why they came and why to the Central Valley specifically?
The first immigrants came as whale hunters, so they were part of the whaling different institutions that existed. Actually, one of the very first whaling companies in the Carmel Monterey area was started by Azorians.
Hmm.
So Azorians from, of course, Portugal, and so they came as whale hunters. They jumped ship and came back to the United States. Many of them to the East Coast, and then made their way to the West Coast, especially because of the gold rush to Central Valley, to Fresno area, and all over the Central Valley from Bakersfield to Modesto. Basically, because of the ties to agriculture,
Hmm.
the agriculture and especially the dairy industry is still one of the Azores' main industry. And at that time, Azorians, I'm talking about in the 1800s,
Right.
1860s, 1870s, Azorians basically lived out of either from the sea or the land, and the
Mhm.
land mostly in agriculture and dairy, and of course fishing.
Okay. Is there a similar climate too, or is it
Not very
not really?
similar. So there's a difference in climate. We're a bit more in the Azores, like San Diego, but with a bit more rain. But it was just the fertile land. I think really fertile and
Hmm.
inexpensive at the time.
Right.
Land really was enticing to those who came from the Azores.
Right. Now, about 2 years ago, PBBI released their first documentary called Untold Stories Portuguese Americans Along the 99 Corridor. And it featured many prominent members of the Portuguese community, including dairy farmers, authors, a school district superintendent, and even a couple sitting congressmen.
That's right. And so that was part of our oral history program, as you know, between the College of Arts and Humanities and the College of Social Science.
Hmm.
We have an agreement to put forth this oral history project. We're very, very happy. We have recorded over 75 oral histories. They're slowly being transcribed and they are being archived. I believe right now we have over 45 already archived at the library. And if folks can go through our library system and see some of these or hear some of them. Some of them are oral histories in a recording, no voice, no video, but with a agreement that we have with MCJ,
Hmm.
Media Communication and Journalism Department, we were able to record quite a few of them on video. And from these, we wanted to do a documentary that kind of told the story of why Portuguese came over here. That
Hmm.
first question you asked, what did they do here? What was important to them? What waves of immigration? And so we did that with about a dozen of those subjects from the oral history, and it turned out to be really successful. It's been in various channels, of course, community
Hmm.
access channels here throughout the valley, and even in Portugal as well through some community access. And of course, it's on YouTube where we've had quite a few thousand people. For us, it was great to have about, I think, right now over 34,000 people that have watched it, which is great for
Yeah.
us.
And yeah, I do want to mention that you can look up Portuguese Beyond Borders on YouTube and watch the film.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All of our events that we do nowadays, we either, if they're in person, we try to film them here through MCJ, and if they're on Zoom, we have a lot of them now since the pandemic. Those are all recorded and they're all archived. We have literally, I believe, over 500 hours of recorded material.
And it's really kind of fascinating in the film. You talk about the close knitness of the community, the Portuguese community here in the Central Valley, and it's also interesting to see the prominence of the people that you have talking as well.
Well,
You're
it's
really.
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Ben, because there are over 400 congressmen, and right now, and even as we speak right now, and there are five members of Congress, I should say, that are of Portuguese background. Only five, and that's the most we've ever had.
Mhm.
And four of them are from the Valley.
Right.
So well, three from the Central Valley and one from the North Valley, and so it's amazing that, and then the other one's from Massachusetts, which also
Mhm.
has a Portuguese community. But the Central Valley, for some reason, and in that documentary, a couple of the sitting members of Congress at the time explained they think it has to do with exactly what you mentioned, that tight knit and the tight agriculture.
Right. Oh, so okay, so now you have a new film coming out, and with the help of Professor Candace Egan, and lecturer Kelly McCoy and some of their students in the MCJ program. So it's kind of set up like the last one. This documentary is focused more on the Portuguese fiesta
Festas, yes,
in Central California. So, what is the fiesta and why is that important?
The Portuguese celebrations or Portuguese festivals are a way of bringing the community together, and more bringing the community of various generations. Because we have many Americans, Californians, and in the Central Valley and throughout the state that are of Portuguese background, but they don't speak Portuguese. I mean, it was their grandparents or their great grandparents, or in some cases their great great grandparents that immigrated. So and we still have an immigrant community, an older, but we still have an immigrant community. And so it's a way to bridge all of those communities
Hmm.
and more to build bridges with other communities. If we look at today's festas throughout the valley, and in California, there are over 100. In the valley, it's all over. I mean, every single town just about has a festa, in some cases, two or three. And so it's a way to bring a bond between the community, for the community to
Hmm.
get together. In the beginning, basically, that was one of the reasons to practice their faith and practice their traditions and their culture. And now, especially within the last 25 years, it's been a way to bridge with other cultures. So we begin to see other folks from other cultures, other ethnicities. Other religions to be involved in the festa, and so I think it is a way for the Portuguese to express who they are and share their cultural concepts with others in such a multicultural state that we are. And as you said, it was with MCJ, so we interviewed again for the oral history project, but
Hmm.
we added some questions tied to the festa,
Right.
and it is called the same story, the same title, Untold Stories, except this one's called the Portuguese Festa in Central California. Shorter documentary. The other one was close to a half hour. This
Hmm.
was about 18 minutes.
Okay.
And right now, we're in the process, with the help of Professor Candace Egan and Professor Kelly McCoy, we're in the process of submitting it to about 10, 8 to 10 festivals, short documentary film festivals. We think that'd be a great idea, a great way to expose this product that was done basically by the students with our, of course, guidance.
Right. Now, I do want to correct myself because I said fiesta. I
That's
just realized
okay.
this. And you call it a festa. I assume they're pretty similar
They're
concepts.
very This is a similar concept. The word fiesta is in Spanish, and the word festa is in Portuguese. We have a lot of that. You know, the Spanish and the Portuguese have a lot of commonalities in our languages. Yeah,
All right. Now, in the previous film, you there was some discussion about the buildings that were set up to hold these festas, right?
correct, correct.
And so I take it this film delves a little bit more into that and that community aspect again.
What we try to do with this documentary, Ben, is put forth what is a festa.
Hmm.
What do people all over the valley see these crazy Portuguese people in the middle of the street, with banners and bands and crowns and queens? What is this all about? So we kind of tell the story of the festa,
Hmm.
how they began in Portugal, how they transitioned to the Azores Islands, how they died in Portugal and continue to this day in the Azores Islands. That actually I deal with in one of my courses here at Fresno State, and then how they popped up here and how they continue. And what is a festa? What happens during that weekend or week of the festa? So we have testimonials from queens, from the lady that makes the capes, or there are many, but one of the ladies that is a cape maker, from a priest in the Catholic Church, from a deacon, from also folks who have been themselves queens, those who have organized it. We actually even have testimonials from two different cooks who cook the sopers, the famous food that accompanies a festa.
Okay. Now, how can people see this film?
So on the 26th of this month of September, it will be premiered at Fresno State in our library, 2206 Lecture Hall. And with kind of a also we'll have a reception, we'll have the premiere, And we will also talk about other PBBI events for the fall of 2023 and some things that we have planned for 2024. So that'll be the premiere. After that premiere, we are looking to have another premiere at the Selma Portuguese Hall, which is
Hmm.
not very far here from Fresno, about 15 minutes drive, because we used a lot of the B-roll, a lot of the footage that was taken was at the Selma Festa.
Okay.
So we're looking at maybe the following week, and then our target is after October 10th to have it on YouTube and to have
Hmm.
it through Fresno Access channels and any community access channel that wants to carry it.
Now, at the event, now the event is 5 p.m., September 26th, in the library, room 2206. And if you come to the library, I'm sure they'll be able to direct you to where that room is. Um, but also at the event, you're going to be showcasing books from the Bruma publishing arm of PBBI. So, what books are you showcasing, and do you have any books on the horizon?
We do. So we have published our first book was is called Folk Tales from the Portuguese in California, which is part of an oral history. It was part of a study done by Dr. Manuel Costa Fontes while he was doing his dissertation at his PhD dissertation at UCLA, and so he never published it. And there's stories from the 1970s that he collected from 64 different people throughout the valley, that carried the tradition of carrying these stories on to future generations. So that is our first book that was published. It came out in September of 2022. We have never really done an official launching here, and so that we thought that event would be good. We also have Into the Azorian Sea, which is a book of an anthology of poetry just came out recently,
Hmm.
and we also have two books of poetry, one bilingual and one just in English, that we were partners with a publishing house in the Azores. Coming up, we have three things that we're working on. Alfred Lewis was a poet here from the Azores who lived all of his life in the valley, came over at the age of 17 and stayed and died in his 70s in Los Banos. And he's had some of his poetry published, but we're looking to put a collection. He wrote a lot of it in English, and so we're going to do a collection of his poetry. And we also are working on translating one of Portugal's best contemporary poets because we want our students to have access to that,
Hmm.
those who don't speak Portuguese, and also from the Portuguese speaking world, a Cape Verdean poet, an anthology of her work that will be coming out here in the next 3 months or so. And we're looking at a couple other things that hopefully will be coming out in 2024.
Denise, let's talk a little bit about the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at Fresno State. What is the history of the Institute, and how are you involved?
So the institute began in 2018. It was our kickoff event. The institute was a process of an evolution. 2 years earlier, so in 2016, we had received a grant from a foundation in Portugal, FLAD, for an exchange program through the Jordan College of Agricultural Science and Technology and the University of the Azores. And in 2016, there was actually a memorandum of understanding between the two universities.
Hmm.
And so that program exists in 2017, the end of 2016, 2017. And with talks with FLAD, and our administration, we talked about doing something a bit different than just an exchange program. How can we build upon the classes that are being taught, and how can we build upon this experience? And so the idea of doing an institute or a center that would focus not only on the classes in the Portuguese language and the cultural classes,
Hmm.
but also on the community itself. And so that that was in 2017 when those conversations began. And then in 2018, we kind of began the formalization of it. In the fall of 2018, the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute was pretty much set up with the grant from FLAD,
Hmm.
and we had our opening event in February of 2019 with the president of the government of the Azores. That gave a wonderful lecture to a packed house here
Yeah.
at Fresno State, and we began at that time also the oral history program. And so now we have the oral history program. We have, of course, the lecture series and conference series, some of them online, some of them in person. But we last semester, the spring of 2022, we had over 17 events, which is over ambitious, but we covered a lot of territory and lots of interest. And when they're online, which is kind of unique, as you know, Ben, we have people that attend these events from Hawaii, from Utah, from Washington State and Oregon, who are of Portuguese background, but whose parents, after being here in the United States, immigrated to different parts of the Western United States, and they want to know a bit more about the Azores, about Portuguese history, about the Portuguese in the Central Valley. A lot of them have roots to the Central Valley,
Right.
and so from that we have, of course, Bruma Publications. We have a community of writers called the Cagajo Colloquium, and a lot of other things that we're trying to put forth as a way to bring awareness to our students, our staff, and our faculty of the contributions of the Portuguese from the Azores to the Valley, and also at the same time to bring awareness to the young generation of Portuguese Americans who, for one reason or another, are not as tied to the community as, of course, their parents or grandparents were.
Right. Now, is Portuguese Beyond Borders, is it centered around the Azores and Portugal, or is it kind of more language central where you bring in other countries such as Brazil or other places like
We
that?
would like it. It's been heavily centered around the Azores and
Hmm.
Portugal. We have tried to also bridge to others. For example, last year we were commemorating in the 200th anniversary of the independence of Brazil from Portugal, and with us, PBBI in Fresno State and the Center for Portuguese Studies at CSU Stanislaus, we had an event, a week-long conference series, which was quite interesting. And we are trying to do every single semester now one event that goes beyond the Azores, that goes beyond Portugal, and that either centers on Brazil or the Portuguese speaking countries in Africa.
Yeah.
We're trying to do at least one event per semester that does that, to bring a little bit more of the Portuguese speaking world to PBBI and to our faculty and staff and students, and of course, the community at large.
And just as far as the structure for Portuguese Beyond Borders, it is kind of unique because it floats between several entities. It's the College of Arts and Humanities, the Jordan College of Agriculture, and then there's one more, I
And
believe,
the
right?
College of Social Science.
That's right. Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, it is unique in that sense, and it's tied because of the exchange program. So
Hmm.
that's how the Jordan College of Agricultural Science and Technology came into, of course, the picture, because it all started because of that exchange program with them and the University of the Azores, and we collaborate with that exchange program.
Right.
And then, of course, the College of Social Science, because of the oral history, the initial oral history seminar that we did to prepare some community members to do some oral history was with the College of Social Science. But that is unique, and we work with both of them. But a lot of the work we do is with the College of Arts and Humanities, with MCLL, because of the language and cultural classes, the Portuguese minors that we have in Portuguese studies and in Portuguese language, and then but we do have every single semester one of our conference series. One of our lectures is around the Portuguese in agriculture,
Right.
or agriculture with the Azores, Portugal, or Brazil. And we also have some things around the social science. Every single semester, we have at least one to two events that is around the political and the history part of Portugal, the Azores, or Brazil.
All right. What has been the impact of PBBI on the Portuguese community in the valley from your perspective?
Well, I'm kind of suspicious on that because
A little biased, I'm
I'm
sure.
very biased on that. But I think it has brought, I think, at one time our current president, when it was the dean of the College of Arts and Humanities at the time when we began PBBI, and he said that he would love to have PBBI be the hub for all that is Portuguese when it comes to academics, when it comes to culture, when it comes to preserving, as an entity to preserve the legacy of the Portuguese in the Valley. And I think we've done that in a way. I mean, there's still a long way to go. We still have a lot to achieve. But I believe that in the short 4 years, basically, that we have been in existence, going to be five shortly, but in the short 4.5 years, and considering that we had a pandemic for a year and a half,
Right,
of those
right.
4.5, I think that we've achieved really a lot of what we set out to do in the oral history, especially having 75 interviews recorded
Right.
is huge in less than 5 years. There's a Portuguese oral history program in Northern California that's run by another university that was in existence for 9.5 years, almost 10 years. And in those 10 years, they recorded 30 interviews. And we've done double that in less than half the amount of time. And I think that the importance of those oral interviews is they're registered in our library. They're, of course, all transcribed, and future scholars can really, with, if we end up having 100 150, can really look and see the Portuguese American experience in the valley. And then the other thing is, I think that it's been really impactful. I see students who are now more and more interested in the Azores, even if they're not from Portugal. Right now, we teach an Azorean cultural class, Azores culture and literature, and the majority of my students are not of Portuguese background. They've just heard about PBBI, they've heard about these islands, they've heard about this place, and they want to learn a little bit more. Some of them are English students, some of them are doing English Lit or other literature students, and they want to know a bit more
Mhm.
about the literature, the poetry, and the history of these islands.
It's funny. Right before this show, I was kind of preparing for the show, and a student came up to me and said, "Hey, how do I get involved in Portuguese? I want to know more about Portuguese music. How do I get in touch with them?" And so I was able to put them in touch with you, and it was already off and running. This was 5 minutes before the show started airing.
Yeah, there's a new buzz about Portuguese through thanks to PBBI, and then the community itself. Our crowdfunding that we do in October has been very, very successful, and it's because of the community support.
All right. So what's next for PBBI? What's coming up?
Well, we have a ton of events. We have a conference at the end of September that we'll be putting forth, also between the 27th and the 30th, the Luso American Education Foundation Conference, which is a cultural organization here in the Valley that we've partnered up with, and it's our 47th conference. PBBI in Fresno State has organized the last four. It'll be online. And then we have, of course, the upcoming publications. We have a upcoming conference with a professor from the University of the Azores that will be, one of them will happen online in October, the other one in person in November. So a lot of different things. And we're actually trying to put together, we have coordinating a studies program on a Portuguese poet who's was really the leader of the Portuguese feminist movement from the Azores. Her name is Natalia Correia. We're dedicating a series to her. And so a lot of different upcoming events in this fall semester and the spring semester as well. And even trying to entice more and more students. We're trying to put some funding together so some of our organizations to come up with some kind of a program through a grant that would entice students to do maybe a master's in Portuguese studies or a master's in the history of the Portuguese in California. And I think it can be done if we can put forth a bit of an endowment to help them out.
All right. Thank you, Denise, for joining us
You.
today. That's all the time we have. We'll see you next week for another edition of Artful Discourse. Artful Discourse is a production of the College of Arts and Humanities at California State University, Fresno. The Dean is Dr. Honora Chapman, and the Associate Dean is Dr. Sergio Laporta. This program is written, directed, and produced by me, Benjamin Kirk, the college's communication specialist. The theme song for Artful Discourse is Maiden Voyage by Fresno State music professor Benjamin Boone from his album, Joy. More information about his music can be found at benjaminboone.com. Special thanks to KFSR and FSR Underground General Manager Julie Lindahl for making this show possible. You can learn more about the College of Arts and Humanities and find an archive of our shows at our website, cah.fresnostate.edu, or on our blog, fresnostatecah.com.